I drew the line at being turned into more of an aggressor. You know, if I was if my goodwill and if my good intention was now twisted or warped to be weaponized into an evil, for me, I draw the line at that. You know, I can tolerate, and I did tolerate lots of different, inadequacies in myself, in my ex-partner. But when it comes to me being now framed as someone who had evil intent from the outset, this is something that was difficult for me to swallow.
Hello, welcome to the IN2G show. And you're probably thinking, IN2G show? How is this an IN2G show when you just see myself, another person who is Seth, and not a panel members? Well, today we are doing something a little bit different, a new thing, to have a real in-depth conversation about marriage, love, and divorce, and everything else in between. What does that mean? How does that affect us? How do we grow from that? And how does our relationship with God change and transform through that process? So welcome, Seth. Thank you for taking the opportunity to have a conversation with us today. So let's just get a bit of a background. What is it who are you? And what is your background? What is it that, makes you Seth, essentially?
So I grew up in London, born and raised in London, to Caribbean parents who'd settled here based on their parents. And I grew up in a Christian home, Seventh-day Adventist Christian home. So we had very strong values that we could take into every aspect of life, where there was an emphasis placed on healthy eating, healthy living, healthy thinking. And we were always taught about the importance of being a valuable contributor to society in general. Professionally, I've sort of gone into the legal space in the UK, but also in business. I've been involved in sort of property, private tuition in English for those wanting to take GCSE exams. I've also spent time working in schools. In the creative side, I've actually been involved in a bit of film and TV work as well. So that's been quite nice to kind of get those perspectives. But value-wise, I'm a family man, and I've always believed in building a good future, and a family is a very important part of that. And of course, marriage is the core unit for that as well. So that's a bit about me.
Right. So, Seth, if you could go back into and speak to your younger self, right, and give 3 advice. What are the advice that you give in terms of dating and connecting with another person?
Yeah, I think that sometimes we have expectations that are not naturally our own expectations, but often they're the expectations of those around us or of the social group or the religious group that we're in. And they're not all bad. Some of them are fantastic. But sometimes they can hold us back from really experiencing what we're supposed to experience because of the need to kind of conform. And I think that ultimately, we shouldn't be too hard on ourselves. So my advice would be to anyone coming up, just don't be too hard on yourself. You know, we're all with fault. We all make mistakes, make errors, and life is a learning process. And so when you start with that basis, you tend to not be too your expectations become more realistic, let's just say, and they become a less significant dynamic in a relationship. The fact that you're trying and you're doing your best, it will always be enough if you already have that kind of foundation.
Right. So, thinking about that and looking into that, trying your best is one thing. So, what are the things that you think that, on review, on reflection, right now, that you could say that you contributed? I mean, you got married, yeah, and what are the things that within that marriage you think that you could have done better, or your spouse could have done better, that would have allowed you to grow and to learn, like you said, isn't it? Because it's about growth, isn't it? It's about us all learning and growing. What are the things that you think could have been done that would have really helped you to grow on both sides, and not just for yourself, but also for the children and for the way that the businesses that you're involved in, and anything else that you think that would help anybody else that's watching this right now?
I think that maybe I was too hard on myself, and by that I mean mean, I expected too much from myself. And, you know, sometimes when you're a person who wants to do your best or who wants to have a legacy or make an impact, you need to stop and think to yourself, well, actually, I'm only human. There's only so much I can do. I'm not Superman or Superwoman. And I think if you've had any kind of failing in the past, or if you've seen anybody fail in the past,
Right.
you can sort of overcompensate, and if you're depending on your character and your skill level, you
Mm.
can fly for a long time just performing, but eventually you'll meet a crash. The problem
Right.
that I had is that I created an expectation of
Right.
exceptional performance because I was trying to perform exceptionally, but that was me being too hard on myself.
Mm-hmm.
And when I couldn't perform exceptionally anymore, when I just came down to performing in a good way or just normally or just average, that wasn't enough
Mm-hmm.
anymore because I'd already created the expectation.
Right. Okay. And can I just ask you, so Steph, when you say that you created the expectation, where do you think the expectation was set? Where did you set the expectations? You write down a list and say, these are the things I'm going to be doing, this is what you're going to be doing, or was it because of the fact that, for example, you get married and everybody gets put into a role? What is it that sets these expectations, do you think?
So for me, there was no limit to what I would do for my
Right.
family. And that sounds nice. It sounds very attractive. But in reality, we're only human. We have our limitations. And it's okay to have limitations. So what I would do going back is say, look, these are my limitations. This is what I can do. This is what I can't do. If you're okay on that basis, let's move forward. No problem. But I think I created an expectation that I was almost invincible. And it wasn't because I was trying to prove any point. In
Mm,
my dynamic, there was like I felt like I was duty bound to pick up some pieces in my
mhm,
my former wife, and when she was my fiance, I felt like I was duty bound to pick up some pieces that she had um, struggled with in her own childhood, in her own
mm.
parenting. So when I understood about that, it wasn't my job to fix any of that, but I took it on as my job. So I ended up doing
Right.
things almost going backwards to try and heal certain things. And of course, it was well received because there's somebody who's going above and beyond to try and nurture in those areas. But that wasn't my job. But I took it as my job. And I eventually crashed because, it's not my responsibility. It's too much for me. I'm not built to do all of that and everything else. So
Mhm,
that's what I mean by saying about being hard on myself. So before I even think about areas that everyone can think of, the areas they can improve if they're being honest, but for me it's just recognizing what you can and can't do and being okay with it,
right.
being your best and knowing that that's enough.
Right. But Seth, can I just ask you, so are you saying then, because for some clarity, some people might be listening or watching this and thinking, well, you get married and you have to work together as a team. And there are going to be areas that are going to be, weak, that need strengthening. There are going to be areas that are going to be trauma based. What do we just leave everybody to kind of crack on with their own thing? How does that fit in? How do we become one? How do we become a married couple and become a team if the teammate doesn't step in areas of weaknesses?
So in setting your boundaries, first of all, you have to have boundaries for yourself in being brutally honest about what you can and can't do, what you can and can't bring to the table. But you
Mm,
also have to be willing to be honest about what the other person can or can't bring based on what you see, based on what you
mm,
observe, not based
mhm,
on what they say, it's what you observe,
mhm,
what's been demonstrated. And if
mhm,
they can't meet the criteria that you have personally that is satisfactory to you at that point, there's no
mhm.
point going forward with an expectation that it will change or get better. If it
Right.
does change and get better, fantastic. But if you can't be comfortable with it at the bare minimum that it comes as in the beginning, you're kind of
Mhm.
setting yourself up for potential disappointment and problems later. So my point is
Right.
that, accept people as they come. And if they're not meeting where you need them to be as they come, then they're not for you.
Right. Right.
They're not
Does
for
it?
you. It's
So
better that you have that starting point. Yeah.
right. Sorry, you were going to say. Carry on. Seth. That it's better to have that starting point. You were saying.
Yeah, it's better that you have that starting point. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
and you're comfortable with that starting point. You're saying, okay, I can work with this level of performance. This
Mm-hmm.
matches my energy. and they can work with my level of performance. Fantastic. Any growth from there onwards is absolutely awesome. But if it doesn't progress much more beyond that point, it's okay because you've already accepted that as being the bare minimum that's sufficient for a workable connection.
Right, right. So, I mean, what would a healing process look like? So, if you've entered into a relationship and there's issues, you're saying the bare minimum. It's as long as you can accept and come in agreement with the bare minimum. But what about if the person there is healing that needs to happen? There's things that needs to move forward from the bare minimum. Either you've accepted it. What would that look like? What do you think that looks like with your experience?
I remember reading, I've got quite a number of books in my book list that I've read over the years that have really blessed me and inspired me and sharpened my mind. And they're all tending to be about personal development. Of course, the Bible is a very big one in that list. But one book called How to Influence Friends and Influence People. I believe it was Dale Carnegie, I believe. I can't remember the author. But that book, there's one particular part in there where it talks about every human being's fundamental desire and need to feel important. Every individual has a fundamental desire and need to feel important. And because of that, people want some kind of validation, some kind of affirmation on some level. Yeah. Um, what that sometimes means, though, is that people find it hard to admit where they have any failures or where there are any failings. So the first step, I think, is being able to be honest enough to say, I'm not strong in this area. I'm not strong in this area. I need to work on this. I need some therapy. I need some counseling. I need to deal with my trauma. So acknowledgement is the first thing. When you get involved with somebody who has some clear trauma and they're in denial about the trauma, they can't work on it because they're even in denial that it even exists in the first place. So it means it's going to be a very steep hill to climb. And we all carry some level of trauma. We all carry it to varying degrees. It could just be that you got bitten by a dog when you were 7, and now you're a little bit afraid of dogs. You could overcome it because you have to work on it. It could be that you came from a domestic violence home. You'll have trauma. That's natural. You can't be blamed for the trauma, but you do have to work on it. And so just because you have trauma, it doesn't disqualify you automatically, but it has to be worked on. Because if it doesn't get worked on, it will come up in some way, shape, or form in other relationships. And then you can put undue burden on the person that you're in a relationship with, who had nothing to do with the cause of that trauma, but they're picking up the pieces. So I think that being wise about what you're able to handle from the outset is something that I would advise people to really be aware of. Don't assume that things in the past don't affect the present. They do, but it doesn't really can't be worked through.
Right. So when you say it can't be worked through, so looking at that, what you just said about working something through, right? When is it that you can say, okay, I've tried or we've tried, and divorce is the only option that I can see or the other person can see how we move forward? When does the divorce card come on the table and say, we've done all that. We tried to work it through and it's not working.
So I came from the position growing up, based on the values I talked about earlier in the home. I came from the position originally that divorce is not really an option. You don't really even consider it. It's not even something you think about, talk about. And I think it's still a good position to have, because I think when you have in the back of your mind that divorce is not something we're going to even consider, it makes you think that much more carefully and plan that much more strategically about if it's a good match. So I still feel that divorce should be something that's very much out of the mind. But there are cases when it's a necessity, sad to say. And in my particular case, I drew the line at being turned into more of an aggressor. If my goodwill and if my good intention was now twisted or warped to be weaponized into an evil, for me, I draw the line at that. I can tolerate, and I did tolerate lots of different, inadequacies in myself, in my ex-partner. But when it comes to me being now framed as someone who had evil intent from the outset, this is something that was difficult for me to swallow, because I'm quite a proud person. And my desire is generally just to do good the best I can. And I think that when my intention is now switched into something very sinister, I draw the line at that, because I realize that now we're no longer in a trusting union where we have each other's backs and they're seen as having each other's backs. Now we're in a situation where it's war. It's sad to say, but then, like I said, when that starts to happen, betrayal comes in. The sense of being unqualified to be respected comes in, and so it's a slippery slope from there. So for me, it should always be something that's not considered very early on. There should be so much to work with in your union, but I think when it comes to any kind of abuse or manipulation of the sort that sort of degenerates the person's character and mental health, that's when something has to come in to make it stop. And sometimes divorce is the only way to do it, sadly.
Right. So when you say that, turn into what, like a villain essentially, so everything that it's perceived, can you give examples of what that looks like in terms of for somebody else who may be thinking, what do you mean? How does that really, in terms of application in day-to-day life?
Yeah, sure. So let's just say, for example, you've got, and if you just think about the differences between men and women biologically, because we are different biologically, we can both achieve many of the same things. There's never a question about ability. Men are generally physically stronger than women. Women are generally much more expressive of their emotions than men, but there are always going to be overlaps and anomalies. But these are generalities, right? So anyway, the point is, when you think about our differences, let's just say that a man who typically wants to be able to show his prowess as a man. He wants to be able to provide, to be strong, to be a protector, all these sorts of typical tendencies. He may say to his wife, look, honey, I don't want you to stress yourself going out there and doing hard labor. I want to provide enough for all of us. If you want to do something, you can, but I don't want you to feel like you have to do it. Let me handle that. And a man will typically be happy with that arrangement because it's just how he's built. It's just how he thinks, typically. Let's just say that a woman enjoys that privilege and she said, okay, fine, let's go with that. But later on, she feels like, oh no, I want to do more, I want to be in more control of what's happening financially. And then she then later turns it around and says, oh, I know why you wanted to do it like that, because you wanted to control me, you wanted me to depend on you, kind of thing. And it's like, that was never necessarily his intention. But when it switches like that, sometimes because of the whisperings of others of how the wider society has different values, it can get into your head for you to think that something that was very well intentioned, that came from the purest of hearts, is now turned on its head. And now the sense of shame and disappointment and betrayal that a man could feel in that situation, when he actually was trying to give her the best privilege in the best way he knew how, in that example, when that flips around, the sense of betrayal could be so crushing, so demoralizing, so depressing. That's an example of the kind of thing I mean, where a good intention gets flipped around and turned into a very sinister motive when that was never the intention in the beginning.
Right. So you mentioned about, it could come through whispers. An intention could be turned and twisted and turned upside down by whispers and conversations with, people, friends, probably families and so forth. When you say that, what do you mean? How do you manage that in a marriage where you've got whispers, you've got people that've got opinions, but they're not in the marriage? How do you manage that?
Yeah, so when I speak about whispers, it doesn't even have to be from other individuals. It could just be from like prevailing ideologies that go into society. So, for example, you've got this concept of a trad wife. Have you heard of the concept of a trad wife before?
Well, explain.
Yeah.
Define it
Oh,
for
yeah.
those that
So
are
trad
watching.
wife is like, yeah, trad is for like traditional wife,
Mm,
and traditional just sort of means it goes back a few generations where women were typically primary carers of the children, by virtue of course, carrying the baby, breastfeeding for a period of time if they could, and being at home, with the children primarily. In many cases, women couples were happy to arrange for the woman to go out and work in whatever way she wanted to later once children were a bit older.
mhm.
Um, and that was fine, and that's worked quite well. There are cases where traditional roles have been sort of like been abused and taken advantage of. That has happened also. But let's just say you talk about a trad wife, as the term has been described. there are some women who are very, very feministically oriented in their thinking,
Mm,
who feel so strongly about how traditional roles have been oppressive to women that they will tell other trad women, trad wives, you know, you're selling yourself, you're not fulfilling your potential. You know, you're allowing yourself to be controlled and abused just by being a stay-at-home mom, for example, or just by choosing to not go and work and have a career. So that's what I mean by whisperings. Some of that stuff can cause that woman to start questioning her own value and questioning, is it really that this man's really trying to take advantage of me? And actually, what it really is a battle between sort of a well-ordered way of running life and starting a family and prospering a family with a kind of like self-centered, egotistical, narcissistic approach, which is coming from the wider society, often irreligious, often oriented by very selfish motivations. So there are these clashes that both men and women have to be navigating in society, and it can put its own strain on marriages too.
mm.
Which is why the idea of being, you know, yoked or unequally yoked is so important, because it's about which ideologies you sort of buy into and subscribe to.
Right. So, I mean,
Yeah.
you
So having
you say
having shared values essentially is what this is about.
it's
It's having shared values
right.
and keeping those values intact. Yeah.
Yeah, because that's what I was going to ask you. I mean, you just said it. I mean, having shared values, but what about if you started with shared values? Like you said, you mentioned you gave this scenario about the trad wife and having that set value from the beginning, and then later on, you know, that gets changed into something else. How do you keep your values intact? You know, even if you don't keep your belief in God, or whatever, how would you still maintain that what you've already, the foundation that has already been set intact?
That's a really good question, and I think it's to do with loving people at their core. So if you if your basis of love and connection is because of the way that they, you know, the sort of religious movement they belong to, or the way they perform their religious rites or something, um, that can be very temporary if you think about the whole scheme of life. Because people are on a journey of discovery, learning, growing, etc. But at their core, let's just say the core quality is kindness. The core quality is wanting to do their best. The core quality is love. That can manifest itself at different stages in different ways, but the core quality is still there, and you can absolutely embrace that. And if you see that the core quality has been expressed on the one hand in going to this particular church or being involved in this other religious ceremony, it's coming from a good place. You know, while it may not be convenient, it may not be in keeping with where you want to go for your religious ceremony at any point in time, but it's still coming from a very good place. So love the core is the point, as opposed to the manifestation of the core, because that can change as people grow, as they mature, as they come into new information, as they do more research. You know, that's what I'm saying. The core itself, if you can love a person for who they are and how they are, if you can't, then that person is not really for you then. It shouldn't be hard to love. It shouldn't, and it should be, that's what I mean by conditions. So I will love you if you're going to continue to go to church on Saturday for the whole of your life, on the Sabbath. That's nice if we can do that together. But if you go through a bit of a journey where, you know, now you want to do something at home or now you want to go somewhere else to do that, it doesn't change your core. If my focus was on the manifestation, then now the relationship comes under fire just because you're going through a bit of a journey. And there's a longevity built into the whole marriage concept, the marriage union. And it's not to be swayed by things like that.
So then
I
how
think
does
I've
that
answered your
fit
question.
into? Yeah, you have in a way, but I want just to push a little bit more, Seth, because how do you then
Yeah, sure.
do how do you connect with, because some people might say, well, we're not equally yoked anymore. Because
Oh,
I want to go to church on a
yes.
Saturday,
Okay.
and that person now wants to now decide they want to go to church on a Sunday or not go to church no more. I mean, we just use that as an example, as a baseline. But what happens when those kind of fundamentals or things that you kind of aligned at the beginning no longer aligns?
Sure. Absolutely. So I've got two ways of looking at this. One is to say about what people do when they love. Yeah, the idea of sacrifice. That's a very important part, which I think modern society seems to be struggling with. The idea of sacrifice within marriage, because there's a lot of emphasis nowadays on people doing what they want, whatever makes them happy, which is kind of opposite to sacrifice. And sacrifice is integral to marriage. So I want to talk about that, but I also want to talk about, if you think about licensing, there are lots of different licenses in the world that you can get for different things. And licenses are normally renewable. Yeah. Every 5 years, every 25 years, whatever it is, you've got to apply again to and meet the criteria to be able to be issued with a new license for whatever the thing is. If you look at your marriage in the same way, where we've got to renew something, it doesn't have to be formally, but we've got to recommit on a regular basis, regular intervals, to keep our alignment intact and to iron out any issues or differences, or to prevent anything creeping in that seems to be threatening the union. That's what has to be done if you want to be successful. Because again, most changes come very gradually over time, and it just starts with small things, small attentions that get missed. And let's just take on the romantic level, the sweet things you used to do that made you so happy together, having a meal together, going for a walk, going to feed the ducks, going to play some activity like pool or snooker or something. Those small things, when life comes along and you've got obligations, responsibilities, they can easily get buried. And so it's important to be able to look at those little attentions and bring them back again and again. You know, set time aside. This is our date time. This is our time, but it's just us. Children can be with other people, and this is just us. That is absolutely essential as a way to feed life into that union. But back to the other example I was given, the other point about what was that I said about the lost the point I made there. I made the point about, I gave two examples, and the second one I've just finished talking about. The first one, I want to develop it. If you could just come back to me with I've lost my trail of thought a little
No
bit.
worries, no worries. It's okay. So in terms of you're talking about the values, you're talking about how, how do you maintain that, where, you're both not on the same journey. However, you're saying about the core. You're talking about how if you genuinely love that person, if you care about them, rather than the fact that they keep the Sabbath, for example, rather than the fact that they go to a specific church, for example, because if that person, for example, is going through a transition, going through a
Oh,
journey.
I remember my point now, and I think it's going to answer you more detail what you're asking me. Thank you. You knew what to do there, Cynthia. Okay, so when you love somebody, yeah, and that's why I mentioned sacrifice. When you love somebody, it becomes very easy to endure sacrifice. Obviously, sacrifice by definition is difficult, but it's a lot easier when there's love, when there's natural love there. And when you love somebody, you begin thinking, what do I do to minimize friction, to increase bonding, increase happiness? What can I do? What part can I play? What do I know that my my wife or my husband likes or that they enjoy that I can do to put a smile on their face? You begin looking for ways to please and to provide happiness. And it's reciprocal. And if you're doing it in a selfless kind of way, then you're covering them and they're covering you. And that can carry you a long, 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 long way. So when I gave my example about, the change of day of maybe you want to worship on this day, I worship on this day, that's more like worst case scenario because generally speaking, you're doing everything you can to be on the same page, do things together, and that you sacrifice a little bit of your comfort to do that. I'm speaking about cases where that sort of like runs out for whatever reason, that expires for whatever reason. In those other cases, it doesn't mean it's a recipe for divorce immediately. It just means that, okay, they're going through a journey. How do we realign and come back on par if we can? And there's a lot of room before you have to think about a divorce option, is what I'm saying. So I think that when you've got the natural love and desire, that creates the opportunity to do more for each other and to deliberately do the things that are going to build and bond as opposed to break apart and tear down.
I mean, that's really amazing and beautiful what you just said, Steph. And I think sacrifice is something that's definitely lacking, I think, in conversations and in actions and in marriages. And I think one of the things that I would love to kind of employ those that are listening and watching us is that, for example, I would give you even like a practical example of that, which would be, and I don't know what you think of this, Steph. Some women or men may feel like, oh, this person hasn't got a job. hasn't, gone and got the job that they need, or they're not, they're not staying in jobs. And my question would be, what are you doing as a team to support that person? Because it could be that actually you've
Yeah.
got the skill set to help write the CV. You've got the skill set to do the research for the place that they're applying for, and to support them in practicing and doing their interview skills and stuff like that. I mean, what are your thoughts on that, Seth? I mean, is that something, when you say
Yeah.
sacrifice, is part of the sacrifice you're talking about here?
Absolutely, and thank you for bringing that up, because it's a real life example that people deal with on a regular basis. Because they say that it's said that finances, or challenges with finances, is one of the major causes of divorce in marriages. So my question: if somebody said, "Oh, my wife doesn't have a job, or my husband doesn't have a job," and they're making it an issue for the relationship, I would ask the question: "Well, why are you with them then?" If they then said, "Oh, I'm with them because when I got with them, they had a job, or they had these skills, or whatever," I say, "Okay, they still have them. They still have those skills." So just because you don't have a job, it doesn't mean the person didn't have the qualities to demonstrate to you that you didn't have to worry in that area from the beginning. If something's changed, then perhaps uh, you haven't necessarily been doing enough of the renewal, or enough of the checking in, or somehow you've lost confidence somewhere along the line. But of course, that could be rebuilt. The point is, you had it in the beginning, but somehow you lost it. How do we get it back again? It's not the end of the world. Life happens, situations come up. You can have a very, very secure job, and through no fault of your own, you lose it. COVID's an example of that. Okay, companies went bust during COVID. If you make and this is what I mean about conditional. If you make your union too conditional, there are so many wins outside of your relationship that you can't control. It's just how life is. You have to be able to be resilient and adaptable, and go back to your core. What's the core that made you compatible in the first place? Revisit that. Go back to the drawing board. Have that communication. What can we do? How do we navigate this new challenge? Because I don't think they're feeling the greatest about the fact that they can't contribute in that area as they did before. They need you in that time more than ever. I wrote when my brother passed. Just to quickly digress, in 2023, he was a very creative person. He was more into the graphic design, product design space. And one of the ways that I decided I wanted to try and remember him was to put some creativity into my current exploits, my current kind of way of professionally working. So, as I said to you before, I work in schools sometimes, I work in business and property. And the two main ways I looked at how I could actually bring creativity was in property, I started thinking about interior design. In schools, I started thinking, I'm teaching students how to analyze a text or analyze a story that some author has written. Why don't I start looking at how I can start writing my own stories? And just inspiring, not inspirational stories. I started doing that. And then I started writing songs, actually. It just transitioned into that. And so I've actually written a couple of songs now, and I've used AI music production tools to produce these songs. And they actually, I still listen to them, and I'm thinking, wow, that's wow. And I'm being inspired by my own songs, by my own
It's
songs.
amazing.
Why I'm mentioning that, is to say that uh, we have the ability to inspire. Um, when we think about where we're coming from a creator who has put creativity in us. He has given us the ability to make something from nothing or from very little. And if we get back to that place of thinking and working together and communicating, um, we'll produce things we didn't even imagine we could produce. But the specific song I have in mind, in answer to your question, that I thought of, is a song called "Familiar Peace." And what I was thinking of when I wrote that song is, I'm speaking from a man's perspective, but you can apply it to women. If women feel like peace is a very strong thing on their agenda, for me as a man, I just want peace, especially at my age now. I just want peace. I want to come home from the difficult world, lay in my wife's arms, lay on her chest, have her stroke my head, and just have peace. Have her say to me,
Mm.
"Sweetheart, here's something I made for you." I love that. And you know what? Doing that makes me want to do anything for her. It's like it opens up a power within me that I wouldn't otherwise have. And so the lyrics of the song kind of indicate that peace actually creates power. it creates strength, it creates motivation. Um, and so in times of like discouragement and darkness because of life situations, if we can just plug into each other and give the support that each other needs, and by the time you're in a relationship, you know what each other likes and what each other's turned off by or what you're sort of worried by. You know each other's preferences, so you can play into that and think, you know what, I know that having this is going to make her feel happier and more at peace. I know that having this will make him feel more comfortable. Let me do that more, you know. And so we don't have to give up because someone's lost their job or someone's lost their a limb or lost their ability to work. There are other ways we can, and again, there's lessons in these experiences too that perhaps God wants to teach us.
Right. So, I mean, when this comes nicely into, my question here with you is that, what is it that what is it that you've learned? One of the things that you learned from your first marriage that you think is making you a better husband right now in your new marriage?
Yeah. Well, first of all, there's a saying called once bitten, twice shy.
Right.
So naturally, just by default, when you think about the rigmarole that you go through of having to bring something of substantial length to an end, of course, when I
Mm-hmm.
got married the first time, my mind was it's forever, and of course that was the same for my ex-wife. It was forever. It is unfortunate. It does make me feel, sad and disappointed that I couldn't have that longer journey. I mean, we were married for 17 years, which is a significant time, especially for my age group in this modern society. Um, and I do feel a slight sense of failure that it didn't go on longer. I feel a slight sense of failure because, people will say to you, "Oh, how long have you been married now?" You say the time, and it's like, "Oh, wow," and they're really impressed. And it's like, it indicates your ability to be resilient, to be forgiving, to be patient, to be all of these things that often are lacking nowadays in society and modern relationships. So you're now counted as one of the examples of people who have got it right. And I will say to you, it could have gone on for longer, for another 10 years, 20 years, etc. It could have. But I think that what I said before about the renewal thing, like the licensing, when you renew something, if you can't go back to the drawing board and be able to say, this is what we need to do, let's figure out a new plan, new strategy, circumstances have changed. If there's too much resistance to being adaptable, that's one of the things that will cause you to start forming a bit of a divide. And again, over time, a small degree variation can end up being miles off by the time you get, further down in terms of time. I think ultimately for me, I I drew the line, like I said before, at potentially being presented as the problem. If I feel like I'm the problem, if I'm told I'm the problem, if I'm told that I'm too much like this, too much like that, and I'm just being me at my core, I then feel bad that I'm now in the way of your supposed progress in life. So essentially, when I make the decision, which doesn't come easily, over say 10 years or so, that maybe I'm the problem, maybe I do need to get out of your way. If that results in divorce, which is what happened in my case, I'm doing it reluctantly, obviously. I'm doing it with a sense of shame and failure. So, but at the same time, I can't live with the idea that I held you back in some way or how you perceived it to be. As it turns out, when I started that journey, though, there was a change of tune. Oh, no, no, I don't want divorce. But the problem is, by that time, too much damage had been done. By this time, emotionally, you're feeling quite low. Mentally, you're quite low. You've lost motivation. Okay, it doesn't happen over time. But if you're doing those check-ins and you're nipping things in the bud very solidly, you can prevent things like a divorce. But I think in my case, too much water under the bridge. There was betrayal. It led to a thing where my emotions, my affections began to go elsewhere. It just was a nasty the situation. And then, of course, when that begins to occur, you don't even want to put them through the stress of even trying to have confidence again in something that had already, largely died. So I feel like, you take your lessons, you take your experiences, and you just aim to be the best you can be moving forward, in my case. So
Right.
my thing is to learn the lessons, learn to be open and honest, learn to be proactive, not reactive.
Right. And just, we're going to close now, but thank you for coming. But I want to have a quick fire round with you. You know, give me one relationship red flag that you think people should see and be like, oh, that's a red flag.
Okay, somebody who always they show sort of obsessive tendencies. It can look really sweet in the beginning, but it can actually be a bit of an imbalance in their character. You have to have the discipline to say that, look, I really want to spend time with this person, but right now I've got to go to work, or right now I've got to finish this project, or right now I've got to do this thing. Other things have to be going on. If everything is about that person, then it's a bit of a red flag, because it means then that it's there's some other kind of hole somewhere. You should leave people long enough to be able to miss them. And I think, it's not. It doesn't mean because you're 24/7 wanting to be around. Don't get me wrong. We all have those moments where we have those. But the point is that real life kicks in, and other things have to get done. And ultimately, nobody's any good to anybody else if they want to sit around all day hugging on the sofa. You've got to get out and work, get up and cook, get up and hoover the house. Practical life comes in. So that's a red flag that often is not seen as a red flag.
Right. And could you give us one green flag that is like, go, go, go? Yes, this is definitely a go in terms of a relationship.
Green flag. Yes. A willingness to have a conversation, even when you're upset, even when the situation's quite tense, but a willingness to have communication and to have difficult conversations. That's a green flag. Because the truth is, the best couples have to deal with challenging situations at times. It may not even be about them, but it's still a challenging situation. It could be about other family. But just being willing to have the communication is a green flag, because it can't survive without communication. The relationship cannot survive.
Well, thank you, Seth, for coming to the IN2G show with me, and I hope we have more conversations in the future. It really was a pleasure.
Thank you. That would be nice. Thank you.